The source material was better. You've probably heard some variation of this phrase before. When it comes to adapting one medium to another, it seems to be a very common thing to say. Though there are some exceptions, it seems that an adaptation is rarely considered to be on the same level as its source material. Why exactly is that? It's much more complicated than it just straying too far from the original. Being different does not mean it's bad. That being said, there can be a lot of different reasons for why. From not knowing which scenes to include over others, to failing to capture the depth of the original. Perhaps it ended too abruptly. Or maybe the characters aren't as fleshed out. Well, gee, if only there was an example that we could discuss that specifically demonstrated everything I just mentioned all in one nice little package. Little Busters is an anime adaptation of the visual novel of the same name. Both versions follow Riki Naoe, a high school student simply going through his normal daily life with his childhood friends, Masato, Kengo, Rin, and Kyosuke. Over the course of the game, Riki is introduced to several female characters, and the player will make decisions on which of these characters to spend time with. Based on those choices, you'll go on one of 6 character routes, where you'll learn about the character you spent the most time with. And if you want to see every character route, you have to play the game multiple times. The anime adaptation was made in late 2012, and similar to previous visual novels that were adapted into anime, it would contain every character route. This way, Riki would experience every route all in one big canon rather than him going through them individually in separate universes. Since the visual novel didn't get an official English release until 2017, just over 10 years after the original's release in Japan, the anime was the first time many of us experienced Little Busters, myself included. And while the anime did receive decent reception at the time, there seemed to be a divided response between the people who were new to Little Busters and those who had played the visual novel first. While the source material is the more highly regarded version in most people's minds, does that mean you should skip the anime altogether? What are the advantages of each version? The visual novel is packed with content and lasts many hours, but can feel long-winded. The common route does a great job at introducing every character and their personalities and is just a fun and humorous route to go through. As for the character routes, they can range from anywhere to great to good with a few underlying problems, to some that are alright. Overall, if I had to summarize the visual novel in one word, it would be genuine. The characters, their friendships, the overall goofiness, the reactions to dramatic moments, even the weaker character routes with some of their absurd story progressions still have the characters reacting in a way that feels sincere. On the other hand, the anime isn't nearly as long-winded, having 26 episodes. It does a decent job at capturing what made some characters great in the original. Most common route episodes are quite good. The overall tone of the show is playful and energetic. The humor is transferred over well in a lot of episodes, and in some instances make particular scenes funnier than in the visual novel. The anime is rough. The common route episodes are fine for the most part, but the character routes are very rushed, with only one that I'd consider to be just as good as the visual novel. Some characters get more episodes dedicated to them than others. There are a lot of awkward moments. Problems are solved either too quickly or illogically. Questionable scenes were adapted over much more important ones, and a lot of it just feels incredibly melodramatic. And to clarify, I'm talking about Season 1. Season 2, which covers Kuragaya and Rin's route as well as Refrain, is surprisingly very good. It can still be melodramatic at times, but for some reason it doesn't suffer from nearly as many problems as the first season, and has the added benefit of doing what the first season did well, but better. Even with Refrain being great, is it worth sitting through Season 1 to get to when you could experience both seasons so much better through another medium? No. For those of you who love the anime, I'm not trying to change your opinion. I'm simply trying to express mine. If you like the anime, then that's great. Both our opinions are valid, but if that's the case, do know that I get quite harsh on the anime in this video. I don't want to hold myself back when discussing the anime, but I also don't want to preface everything I say with, in my opinion. The reason for this video existing is because the visual novel is really special to me. It helped me in a time when I was experiencing a bunch of negative feelings, a lot of which which Little Busters directly tackles with some of its themes. The characters in this game also mean a lot to me, and to see them and their routes change to the extent that they were, to the point of destroying the themes I mentioned and flanderizing some characters while diluting others, greatly disappoints me. I'll be looking at the anime as a standalone title, as something shouldn't need to rely on another medium to enhance the experience, but I will also be comparing it to the visual novel, as that's practically unavoidable. When certain things aren't working well and we ask what it could have done differently, well, then we already have our answer through the original source material. Before jumping into it, I want to briefly go over a few things. Since I'll be covering season 1 of the anime, I will be spoiling 4 of the 6 character routes from the visual novel. Even if it's been years since seeing the anime, chances are you don't remember exactly what happens in these routes. This was the case for me in 2017 when playing the visual novel for the first time. The only thing I remembered about Little Busters was refrain. If this is the case for you, then I recommend playing the visual novel to re-experience the character routes. Not to mention that the anime left out so many things from the source material that it's worth experiencing again anyway. I also won't be covering the anime in chronological order. If I structured the video like that, it would be all over the place. To go from a character route back to the common route over and over again would be repetitive, since the common route episodes suffer from a lot of the same things and I would just end up repeating myself. With that out of the way, in all honesty, the anime actually starts off pretty well. It shows off their typical daily life, highlights some quirks of the characters, gradually introduces other characters, and is overall quite humorous. Most common route episodes are like this as well. You can notice some grievances within the first few episodes that are present throughout the show, like Riki narrating at inappropriate times, telling the audience what to think when it really isn't necessary, but thankfully those moments are sparse. The anime has 8 episodes dedicated to the common route, excluding the character-specific episodes. There are various other moments in the common route in the other episodes, but these 8 are completely dedicated to it. 8 episodes seems like a good amount for the common route, even though it's one of the longer routes in the game, being 8 to 10 hours. The anime, being only 26 episodes long, had to choose which of the many scenes from the common route would be most suitable to adapt. 26 episodes seems like a lot, but considering it also covers 4 of the characters' routes means they are very limited on time. While the visual novel can get away with having a lot of slice of life moments because they essentially have an unlimited amount of space to work with, the anime had to be very careful when it came to this. Now, to me, the obvious solution would be to adapt as many character-specific scenes as possible without getting in the way of the actual character routes. The more we learn about a character before their route starts, the better. Many character scenes double as slice of life scenes anyway, so that shouldn't be that hard. We could also include a few scenes that are more focused around the slice of life aspect that aren't necessarily character specific. Many of these scenes are funny and showcase the characters' friendships and aren't that long to begin with. The anime does do this, but to varying degrees of success. It does give us more character-specific episodes than pure slice-of-life ones, which is what I prefer, but even though that should work great, the anime ends up making several strange decisions in that regard and still somehow includes so much filler that there are a lot of times that it feels like you can skip entire episodes without missing anything. A lot of these episodes feel really stretched out for seemingly no reason, while other episodes feel very rushed. Filler is kind of a broad term and can mean a lot of different things. So here's what I mean specifically. When progression of all kinds stops, a scene or episode that holds no new information or furthers the plot or character development in any way. An easy way to identify filler is asking yourself, can I skip this scene or episode without missing any important information? Would I still be able to completely follow the story if I were to skip it entirely? If the answer is yes, well then there you go. There was nothing of significance that happened in that episode to warrant watching it. Take episode 15 for example. In this episode, Riki is tricked into having a sleepover with a female cast. Now, I could go over this episode and summarize it, but in the end, it would be a waste of time. Like, what do I even say about this episode except that Riki has a sleepover with the female cast? What information can I go over that would be important to remember for future episodes? I can't think of anything. At the same time, filler is hard to argue against because it's just a fun episode with the cast having a good time. How does that make it detrimental to the series? People always rave about that one car episode in Dragon Ball Z, so filler isn't always bad, right? I mean, yeah, maybe. Filler can be a good breather between something like a dramatic character route, as I briefly mentioned before. And in the anime, this episode happens right after Mio's route, so it could be considered a good break of tension between her route and Haruka's route, which is right after this episode. I do agree with that, but at the same time, that doesn't mean you can't have important information in these episodes like other anime have done. In fact, since so many of the character-specific scenes in the visual novel double as slice-of-life scenes anyway, they could have easily just kept moving along with the character scenes while still giving us a breather. But because the sleepover episode doesn't include anything important, you can skip it. The fact they decided to include so many scenes like this in the anime is very puzzling, though you could say the same about these scenes in the visual novel as well. They're just fun scenes to take a breather after multiple character scenes in a row. While that's true, there's a bit of a difference. These scenes do end up having impact in the visual novel because it builds towards refrain on subsequent playthroughs, though they can be subtle. The scene also doesn't last as long in the visual novel. The two longest scenes in the common route that I can think of are the sleepover scene, which took me about 18 minutes, and the test of courage, which took me about 11 minutes. And even in the case of the sleepover, there's an alternative option to just not go at all and to hang out with the bros instead, which doesn't take nearly as long. The fact that the anime doesn't have nearly as much time to work with as the visual novel also makes the importance of these scenes vary between the two different mediums. Why include something like the sleepover when you have so many other important moments from the visual novel? Even if you want to use it as a breather, why does it need to take an entire episode? You could have used that time to include scenes that hold more weight, like any of Haruka's scenes. You know, just as a random example. But that's just my bias talking. If the anime is guilty of filler, then so is the visual novel. Most common route episodes are fine, with even some moments that I consider to be funnier than in the visual novel. Having the characters spend time together, especially between 2 or 3 that haven't had much interaction before, is good too. But if there's one thing that really drives me nuts, it's the smaller uses of filler to stretch out episodes unnecessarily, making it so more important scenes either can't be as long as they need to be, or don't have the opportunity to be included at all. Let's use another example from the sleepover episode since we're already talking about it. Riki sneaks into the girls' dorm to make his way to Rin's room since he isn't allowed in there. Except, the scene is over a minute long. Instead of having Riki sneak around briefly and then cutting to him arriving at Rin's door, they waste an entire minute of Riki sneaking around and hiding from various girls and the disciplinary committee. A minute might not seem like a lot, but having these small instances of filler scattered across the entire show starts to add up very quickly, especially when you consider that none of this was in the visual novel at all. Riki was just escorted there by Kud and Komari. These kinds of moments, as well as making scenes longer than they should be, make the sleepover last for far too long. The episode itself could have been much shorter, but is stretched out unnecessarily. The Test of Courage episode is probably the biggest offender of this. The Test of Courage in the visual novel took me 11 minutes, as I said before, and they somehow managed to stretch that out into 21 minutes, which is really ironic considering how they condensed the 4 to 5 hour long character routes into 3 episodes each. They made a small joke in the visual novel about how there might actually be ghosts in the school into an entire conflict in the anime. When it should have ended near the halfway point, the episode keeps going because now there's an actual ghost in the school, I guess, which apparently doesn't faze anyone at all as they immediately come up with a plan to either catch it or chase it out. This happens for so freaking long, and then they finally do corner it into a classroom and it's revealed that it's just some freaking bird, who is apparently a bird that Kyosuke grew up with. The bird just so happens to be something of significance to him. And then we get a flashback and a backstory for it? Is this scene supposed to be emotional? This is the first time we see this thing. It's just some random freaking bird. Maybe if they mentioned it briefly a few times before this episode, it could have left an impact, but like, it's just some random freaking bird. This bird is actually from the visual novel as well, but it's so out of the way and insignificant that it's baffling they decided to combine it with the Test of Courage. They spend so much time on this, and for what? Freaking nothing. The bird has no relevance to the characters and is never mentioned again. They could have combined this episode with the sleepover one and we could have had another entire episode to work with. There are examples of this kind of filler scattered across not only the common route but the character routes too. From including scenes into the character route episodes that don't hold any significance, to having way too many scenes lasting for far too long, to the instances of fan service. I could go more in depth, but I think the examples I've given are enough to get the point across. Plus, there's not much else to talk about with the common route because they're slice of life episodes. Not a whole lot happens aside from the characters hanging out and doing various activities. The majority of Rin's common route scenes in the visual novel are fun, but don't hold a whole lot of significance. And there are several episodes dedicated to those scenes. The only episode that I feel is worth mentioning is Kengo's episode, which is unique in the fact that it's one of the only common route episodes that has actual significance to the plot. I think having more episodes like Kengo's would have greatly benefited the common route, because when the anime does focus on just the plot and characters without having much filler getting in the way, it can achieve great things.
私は思うことがあります。今までに出版された本をすべて読むことができればいいのに、小説が書かれ、そして読まれるのは人生がただ一度であることへの抗議からである。私の好きな作家の言葉です。本を読んでいる間は、その主人公になれるような気がする。私は二人分の人生を生きるために本を読んできたのかもしれません。
When I played the visual novel around 3.5 years ago, Mio was the first route I went on. The decision was made entirely because I thought she was an endearing character, rather than thinking she was deeper interesting. And for the most part, her route was very endearing, as Mio was a sarcastic yet lovable character who, despite my initial impression, did end up having depth to her character. Her route has more of a supernatural theme than the other characters, making it have a little more intrigue than the other routes. As the route goes on, it leans more and more into poetry and symbolism, and goes over it extensively, which ends up being very important to the ending of the route. Though I think the implementation of poetry could have been handled better, as I think it can sometimes come off as conceited, but I still think it's a great route. In comparison, Mio's route in the anime is an example of how including more important scenes over less important ones made for a good, enjoyable experience, but ironically led to disappointment in the end by not including important elements from the visual novel. And by the end, I literally mean the end. Even though I had my personal issues with the ending in the visual novel, it was still very fitting and had plenty of build up towards it. Not just mentioning it, but going over various poems and the symbolism in them so the ending could actually be interpreted and was fitting overall. The anime, on the other hand, did not include nearly as much build up in that regard, and as a result, the ending feels incredibly out of place. It's a shame because while Mio's route in the anime is almost as good as the visual novel by adapting it so well, it ironically ends up falling short anyway because of what they didn't adapt. It's weird because this route is one of the only ones that makes each scene feel important, even her common route episode. These scenes do really well at highlighting her personality, like the scene with Riki and Mio having lunch together, showing that she comes off as a shy bookworm but also has a sarcastic and stoic side. Even with Riki and Mio just talking about simple things like the differences between onigiri and omusubi? It doesn't come off as meaningless because Mio is a new character that not only Riki, but the audience needs to get familiar with. It also leads to important moments like showing how others call her shadowless. Riki even talks to Kyosuke about it. Riki says that she views the world from under her parasol, and thinks that he would view the world in the same way if Kyosuke and the others didn't save Riki when he was sad as a kid. Ugh. Sorry. I ended up watching the anime a few times and I'm just so sick of hearing his backstory. Mio's book is also brought up, saying that her very self is written in the book and that is very important to her. Mio ends up losing that book later in the episode, and Kuragaya asks Riki to help Mio find it. The scene where they're looking for the book is good and emphasizes the importance of it to Mio. We also learn more about her and her negative, lonely view of the world. While they're looking for the book, Kuragaya shows up out of nowhere. Hey, I figured it out, lol, here's my deduction, and it's right, and here's the girl who did it, and wow, it's fixed. Well, okay then. There are two variations of the scene in the visual novel depending on if you're headed towards Mio's route or not, and for some reason they decided to adapt the version where you're not. The other scene would have been more satisfying since Riki solves it himself. It's at this point where Riki asks Mio what her book is about, and we learn that it's a poem book. Riki flips the book open to the bookmark page and reads a poem that will end up being very important later on, right? It will, right? Just like the visual novel, right?
悲しからずや空の青海の青にも染まず漂う
Episode 12 is when Mio's route officially begins, and honestly, there isn't a lot to say. This and the next episode do very well at adapting Mio's scenes from the visual novel, like I said before. The slice of life scenes in Mio's route don't feel meaningless, as all the characters are interacting with her for the first time. A lot is learned about her in a way that doesn't feel rushed, and the episode overall is very funny. I have my various issues here and there, but it's mostly presented very well. I think there are a few scenes that could have been cut or shrunk down to fit other important scenes into the anime somewhere. Like any of Haruka's scenes. You know, just as a random example. But even then, the scenes they do include feel important. And if you look at the scenes they didn't adapt from the visual novel, the information in most of them are implemented into the other scenes. The only thing to go over in episode 12 specifically is that it's reinforced that she's called shadowless by others for not having much of a presence. And if you've ever seen a key anime before, you immediately know that this is going to end up being literal. She says herself that she's like a pebble on the side of the road that you don't notice. Riki also asks her to join the Little Busters as their manager, and she agrees after a humorous misunderstanding. Later on, Kyosuke has a plan to have everyone join a Tonka contest, and as it turns out, Mio knows a lot about it. She explains it to everyone, but they all get really bored from her explanation, which is hilarious, and is when Haruka suggests doing it in a more creative way, not really taking it seriously at all. During the middle of this, Riki notices that Mio has left the room. He catches up with her, and she says that she only left because she doesn't know how to feel about having fun with people after having no friends for her whole life. She also says that it's too late to have fun, being all mysterious and something that I hesitate to even call foreshadowing. She says a lot of stuff here which tells us a lot about her without outright saying what it is. Oh wait, no, Riki just straight up tells us, holy crap. Regardless, I think it's a good scene. The end of the episode shows that Mio isn't in class and Kud tells Riki that she's sick. It shows us there's clearly something wrong regarding Mio and that there might be someone else who looks just like her, a Mio lookalike who Riki saw in the crowd in the beginning of the first episode of The Route. The next episode continues with Riki saying that Mio hasn't been to school the last few days and that no one has noticed. Riki sees Mio under the tree again and it seems like she knows something that he doesn't. She says she's going to where the end begins and tells Riki to accompany her. They get there and Mio asks Riki to tell her more about himself and the Little Busters, and we get Riki's amazing backstory again. I was physically weak, I had narcolepsy, my parents died, I was in the hospital, my life was awful, but at least I had the Little Busters, friends sure are great. It's funny because this is the opposite of what happens in the visual novel. This part of the game is them on a date and Riki listening to her observations about the Little Busters. Riki even comments, "You seem to understand us better than ourselves." She only came into the picture a few episodes ago, so it makes sense in the anime that she doesn't know them very well. It's also an example of them skipping a few scenes, but how that can be a good thing without compromising too much. Even though they skip the date, we do end up getting most of the important information from them in other scenes, including this one. After Mio recites that poem that she likes again, the mysterious Mio lookalike shows up, and we learn that Mio has no shadow, which is the reason why she always carries around a parasol. As it turns out, Midori, the Mio lookalike, has come to switch lives with Mio and take her place. And like Mio, she doesn't display a shadow either. Riki then has a sleep attack, and it's one of the only times Riki doesn't narrate to himself about having narcolepsy. Hey, good job, Riki. Riki wakes up from his sleep attack, and he says he doesn't remember why he was at the beach. The show spends a few minutes showing that Riki doesn't remember who Mio is, implying days or weeks have passed, before seeing her poem book again and remembering who she is. It happens so quickly and sluggishly that it feels like Riki not remembering Mio wasn't that important to begin with. Riki runs to class to try and find Mio, only to find that Midori has taken her place and that he's the only one that remembers the old Mio. Riki starts to question if he's the only one who's mistaken, which the anime doesn't spend nearly as much time on compared to the visual novel, but still makes it interesting with the way that they present it anyway. Midori in both the visual novel and the anime comes off as a villainous type character, trying to confuse Riki and make him forget about the real Mio.
でもさ、みんな私のことミオって呼んでるんだから、リキ君にもミオって呼んでほしいの。
それはできない。
どうして？
緑のことをミオと呼んでしまったら、僕は多分もう一人の西園さんのことを忘れてしまうだろう。
I mean, that's a pretty confident conclusion to come to so quickly. He also comes to the conclusion that Mio is Midori's missing shadow very quickly as well. Kinda unsatisfying. Despite that, at this point while watching the anime, I couldn't help but feel that it was doing this route a lot of justice. A few things felt awkward, sure, but it captures the feeling of the visual novel pretty well. The final scene in this episode is a bit overdramatic, but not too much to really complain about, especially if it doesn't get any worse than this. What? The next episode continues with Riki trying not to forget about Mio, and Midori continuing to be antagonistic towards him and trying to confuse him even more. These scenes are once again played off very well, especially with Midori's mind games with Riki, as she says that memories are just illusions created in your head. Kyosuke tells Riki not to trust anyone but himself, which is immediately said again 30 seconds later in the next scene as a flashback. Riki suddenly remembers about the Tonka contest they all did and how Mio said that she had thought up of a poem. He immediately finds it, and it's a poem about a conversation they had who knows how long ago at this point. Riki reaffirms to himself that Mio was indeed a real person and that he won't doubt himself anymore. Midori sees this and seems to be surprisingly willing to help Riki find Mio all of a sudden. She gives Riki a hint to where she is, and as it turns out, she's exactly where she was the last time they saw each other. They start talking, and Mio tells him how she met Midori, who turns out to be an imaginary friend she saw as a sister. This went on for a while before her mom decided that this wasn't normal and that Mio needed treatment. It wasn't long before she could no longer see Midori and forgot about her completely, until one day she reads a poem that's been repeated a few times already and remembers her again. After that, she no longer had a shadow. Mio says that she somehow knew that Midori would show herself again one day, and when she did, Mio would be the one to disappear this time because that's what should have happened in the first place. So basically, she felt guilty about forgetting Midori, and as compensation, lets Midori take her place. She says she wants to be alone forever and how that's her greatest desire. She asks Riki to shut her coffin and turns around super dramatically, and then things just get ridiculous. She disappears again, and Riki screams and cries while also thinking to himself about how his memories of her are vanishing with each tear, and that after he sheds his last tear, he will forget her completely. Oh, how very deep and poetic. The drama suddenly turns up to 11 and tries super hard to make you feel some kind of emotion. Moments like this can be sad without having to put them on full display. This is sad. Look how sad this is. He's even screaming. How dramatic. These overdramatic scenes can get in the way of us actually feeling the way it wants us to feel. I look at this scene and can't help but be embarrassed with how Riki is acting. Being subtle about it can have the audience reflect on what's happened, and that should be enough. The atmosphere can still be built by the music and simple actions by the characters. Riki collapsing onto his hands and knees by itself would be fine. If you really want to add more, you can zoom onto his face as he has some silent tears. Riki's phone rings as he's crying, which he immediately answers, and what do you know, it's Midori.
分かってる。西園さんを連れ戻すんだ。
What? How does he know that there's still a way to bring her back when he was just crying and telling himself that he's going to forget her? He was even saying that after his last tear is shed that he'd forget, but then he just stops crying anyway with no hesitation. Nah, it was just a show, bro. I'm not actually sad because I somehow know exactly what to do in this situation.
僕は西園さんのことを忘れなかった。だから緑、君がどうなっても今度は君のこと忘れないよ、ずっと。
What the heck? We were led to believe that Midori was the villain, but I guess she's not anymore? Riki saying that he'll always remember Midori no matter what happens is just like... Why would you do that? Especially with how much she provoked you and made you try and forget about Mio so she could take her place forever. But whatever, we had fun, lol, I'll never forget about you and the super good times we had. We sure were the best of buds, you and I. And like, Riki said before that he's going to bring back Mio to this world, almost like he already knows what to do. So what exactly is his plan?
君はいつか自分の命をちっぽけだって言ったね。
Ah, yes, I know exactly what I must do to bring back Mio. Jump into the ocean and keep going until she's back. I'm sure that will work. And while I'm doing that, let me talk to Mio, but inside my head, and monologue to myself about how I was sad as a kid and how the little buster saved me again. That story will never get repetitive, I swear. So yeah, Riki heads straight into the ocean, and once he's submerged, he's transported into another dimension, I guess. Wherever he is, he starts talking to Mio, who is now a bird, and tells her that it's okay to be lonely because everyone is already lonely and that's why people communicate. He suddenly has no clothes on and continues to talk to Mio, who isn't a bird anymore and is also naked. Mio and Midori join hands while speaking to each other through their minds in whatever dimension they're in. They turn into a bird again and display a shadow for Riki, which makes it possible for him to stay above the water and not drown, I guess. And then he wakes up on the beach and everything is magically all better through the power of symbolism and poetry. All in 2 minutes. An entire 3 episodes worth of building a conflict, and it's over in 2 minutes with whatever just happened. The anime hits us with this super bizarre ending that had so little buildup that it feels embarrassing to watch. We got scenes talking about poetry and some symbolism, but poetry itself was barely incorporated. So how is this scene supposed to be meaningful, especially for the people who only watch the anime? I said I thought the ending to the visual novel was kind of conceited with how hard they implemented poetry into the last scenes, but it at least fit and gave us all the symbolism and hinted towards their meaning before this point so the audience could actually interpret what was going on without having to have an extensive knowledge of symbolism and poetry to begin with. That poem that Mio liked so much was brought up a lot. It was discussed in detail. Mio's desires were brought up quite a bit too. We got to know her a lot better, and we were able to make the connections between her and that poem. The anime does bring up the poem, but it's barely talked about. It did a good job with Mio as a character, but we don't have enough information to connect her fully with a poem that we heard maybe 3 times. Did they even discuss the poem in depth at all? Because we don't have a lot of information or build-up, we're left with an ending that doesn't make any sense at all. Like, what is even going on? The audience is expecting a satisfying conclusion, and then this is thrown at us. We're left with an ending that feels like it wants us to make up our own interpretation of what's happening instead of giving us common meanings of certain symbolism, or even symbolism the show created itself. I don't know, it's whatever you want it to mean, leave us alone. The route had a supernatural theme before this point, but this is such a stark contrast to the rest of it that it feels incredibly out of place. Imagine a series of paintings trying to tell a story, only for the last painting to have a bunch of paint thrown at it. But then you'd hear from the artist about how freaking unique the last painting is, and how the colors represent the characters, and how the size and shape of each color represents each character's inner feelings or something. The fact that it has symbolism at all does not suddenly make it great or beautiful for that fact alone. And I'm not trying to say that symbolism or abstract art is bad or meaningless. Absolutely not. It can evoke some strong emotions in people. It can really inspire people that try and find deeper meaning in things. It has value. But oh my gosh, is it frustrating for people who don't have that way of thinking or an extensive knowledge of these things to have it suddenly implemented in a story that had nothing like it before that point. And that brings up the biggest thing. This exact scene, with the script and symbolism and whatever else, could have worked. It could have worked like it worked in the visual novel. This exact same scene, nothing changed, could have been impactful if they implemented poetry and symbolism at least a little more, bringing up her poem more often, hinting towards all the symbolism used in that scene, and similar theming could have made the scene good. Ironic, isn't it? Before this point, I was saying how including more important scenes ended up making her route before this point almost as good as the visual novel. But it's that very same thing that made the final moments feel very abrupt. At the very least, it ends on a touching note. I prefer the friendship aspect of Little Busters a lot more than any of the romantic relationship aspects from the visual novel. The way Riki describes licking Mio's tongue when they kiss at the end almost makes me gag. The extra content the visual novel has makes the ending at least have some payoff, even if it does come off as a little conceited to me. If the anime had changed the ending a little to make it more fitting, perhaps I would have preferred the route in the anime. But as it stands, the route itself would have been strong if not for the ending. Or rather, it is strong until the ending. I guess it's up to the individual whether or not a bad ending can ruin everything else that happened before it. There are some cases where a bad ending didn't hinder my enjoyment of the show too much, but this is not one of those instances. It makes me mad because of how good it is until the ending. It sucks that it's so good only for it to end so poorly and abruptly. It sucks that I was enjoying it so much only for me to get so angry by the end of it. Actually, if the ending was as strong as the rest of the route, it would easily be the best in the anime. But as it stands, that honor goes to a character that had much more screen time to work with.
小さい頃から私はお母さんに憧れていたんですよ。お母さんみたいになりたくてしょうがなかったんです。でも私はリキの知ってる通り、こう育ってしまいました。努力してもこんななのです。おバカな子だと私を見て言うでしょう。今の自分がなりたい自分でないのならば、なれるように努力をしようと思いました。
Étude has what I consider the weakest route in the visual novel, and the strongest route in the anime. It's really weird. The anime decided to give Étude a lot more attention than the other characters, giving her some of the best episodes in the common route and her individual route. She also has the most episodes dedicated to her, 5, which is one above every other character. Because of this, she ends up being one of the better characters the anime has. And heck, maybe even better than she was in the visual novel. While Mio's route in the anime could have been as good as the source material if it weren't for the ending, I can just straight up say that Étude's route in the anime is as good as the visual novel. or at least close to it. The overarching plot in Coud's route is pretty strange to begin with, but the anime just cuts the BS and gives you the story straight up. When compared to the other routes in the anime, I consider it to be the best of the four. It's also the only route where Riki doesn't recite his stupid backstory. But with that said, looking at it by itself, it's still relatively above average. And because of that, I don't have a lot to say about it. Because Coud has 2 common route episodes dedicated to her, they decided to be sneaky and make the second episode not from the common route at all. Episode 8 focuses on Coud getting a roommate, which happens somewhat early in the common route, and episode 19 adapts the first few scenes of her route and is honestly the best episode of season 1. When I first watched Little Busters back in 2012, Coud was my favorite character because the anime gave her this special treatment, and this episode is a shining example of that. In the episode, we see a group of girls making fun of Coud because she's really bad at English and is therefore bad in English class. The test is coming up and the girls are betting if Coud will fail or not. This episode is really good at having us feel sympathetic towards Coud, who's just earnestly trying her best. I swear, this episode has lines and moments that weren't in the visual novel. Lines like Kuragaya saying how it's shocking how much Coud knows about things she's interested in. It gives Coud a little bit more character. Though, I'm not sure how it relates to things in the long run. Futaki telling Coud not to fill the right answers in the wrong row, only for her to do just that near the end of the episode after all the characters helped her study and cheer her on, makes me even more sympathetic towards her, and man, I just want to give her a hug to make her feel better. Then for that feeling to be satisfied in the very ending scene with the other characters joining her in the supplementary classes even though they don't need to, it's just a really good episode. Episode 21 is where Coud's route officially starts in the anime. It starts with a scene that lasts 3 minutes too long before finally getting things started. A few of the Little Busters are hanging out while Coud plays with her dogs. Night comes and Riki goes outside to buy a drink, where he sees Coud doing a ceremony of sorts that's tied to Tewa, where she's from. Coud asks Riki to join her, which involves painting each other in just whatever comes to mind. In the visual novel, this is kind of an intimate moment that greatly furthers their relationship, as well as giving us more of Coud's background. In the anime, it still feels intimate, which isn't a bad thing, but because it doesn't really lead to anything relationship-wise, it kind of feels awkward and out of place. Kind of. I appreciate the background it gives to Coud, but I can't help but feel the scene could have been shorter, especially since it lasts 7 minutes. Shorten it up, and you could have had a few extra minutes to include another scene anywhere in the anime, like one of Haruka's scenes from her route. You know, just as a random example. The next day, the group is eating in the cafeteria when they overhear the news on a nearby TV that Tewa's astronauts are going to conduct a rocket launch to go to space. One of the astronauts is interviewed about the launch, and Coud reveals that it's her mother, and that her mom's dream is to go to space. The next scene is in the exact same location, but now the launch is starting and everyone comes to watch. After Coud tells Riki more about her mom, they see that the rocket has exploded while trying to launch and that things are going into chaos. Coud faints, and at the start of the next episode, she's laying on one of the school's infirmary beds. Her route in the anime is interesting in the fact that it's the only route that has strong hints towards refrain. The first and second episodes of season 1 gave us a few things, and after that we get a vague hint after every route. But besides those moments, I can't think of any other time it happens until Coud's route. And while it's pretty blatant that it's hinting towards something not known yet, it's subtle about what exactly it could be. Coud wakes up from her bed and she says she remembers being in prison, which could easily be interpreted as her just remembering something from when she was in her home country. The anime makes a big deal out of this too, as Coud has an anime original scene with Kyosuke who seems to know exactly what she's talking about. Meanwhile, in the visual novel, the whole "I remembered the thing I forgot" thing was so subtle that I hesitate to even call it subtle at all. Even having known what happens in refrain, I only kind of got the impression that it might be about that rather than her route. I really wish they would have spread these hints across the entire season rather than just the last route they adapt. The anime ends up being much more direct about these things than the visual novel, and I think it's to its benefit. It makes things a lot more interesting. The game has incredibly vague hints here and there that are honestly just there for people who are replaying the game. All the good hints are in the bad endings in every route. So Coud needs to decide whether or not to go back to her home country since it's practically at war at this point and no one knows if her mom is still alive. Riki and Rin end up talking to Coud about it, but she still seems afraid of going back. After that scene, we have an instance of something the anime does every so often that drives me freaking bonkers. It cuts to everyone in the baseball room having a round table discussion about Coud and her problems. Did someone just organize this spontaneously and set up a time for everyone to join to talk about Coud in specific? I wish I knew what happened before these types of scenes. Why is everyone here? Were they called over? Is this an organized meeting that was scheduled? The whole scene is just hilarious to me. In the visual novel, this conversation is just between Riki and Coud, where Riki tells her to go back to her home country and she starts overreacting to the suggestion. But since they don't want to hint towards any kind of romance at all, I guess the the anime solve this problem the way they've done it previously. Just include every character they can think of. I'm sure a two-way conversation can fit well into a 10-person discussion. Imagine if something terrible happened to you and all your friends were in this exact setting talking about you and your problems. I know I wouldn't appreciate it. It's a pretty sensitive and personal subject. Kud ends up listening to the conversation outside the room, only for Futaki to show up out of nowhere, and then literally everyone else coming outside in a group, being unfazed by her overhearing the conversation. These kinds of scenes don't show up too often, but it's annoying enough seeing it once that seeing it in the other character routes is frustrating. Having multiple characters present in a sensitive or personal setting isn't appropriate. It just feels awkward. Kud finally decides on what to do after Riki gives her advice, which is somehow not his backstory. The next episode shows Kud back at her home and things are dangerous and yeah, it's pretty entertaining. She meets her grandfather and ends up hiding somewhere before being caught by someone who used to work for her mom. Then it suddenly cuts to a scene where everyone is just hanging around worried about Kud, and it almost seems like a soap opera with how dramatic they're being. But once again, it's a scene that ultimately doesn't matter. Wow, we sure are worried about Kud. Don't worry though, Kud will be back, she promised. Mio doing a small montage of Kud playing baseball with them, it's all kind of useless and none of it is new or useful information. I was enjoying Kud being at her old home and was engaged when danger crept up, but now it's just this scene immediately when things are getting interesting for no reason. And in the amount of time that scene took, we could have had much more important moments. Cut out that entire section and nothing changes. We could have just continued on from the last scene. There's still additional information from the visual novel that we can work with. And just like with Mio's route, the ending of this route is also weak. Kud does end up being in a prison-like dungeon and starts hearing everyone's voices as they worry about her, which gives her more motivation to try and escape. Riki is holding onto a gear that Kud wanted to throw away but was saved by him. He holds the gear thing tightly to his chest and it literally teleports to Kud, who then uses it to completely and utterly shatter the chains that are holding her. This was already a stretch in the visual novel and it's so funny seeing it animated. I know the anime has already established a supernatural-ish theme with Mio's route, but this is kind of just like a lazy way to solve the conflict. And this is obviously all symbolic for one of the themes in her route, but regardless if it's the deepest message to ever be unearthed, for storytelling purposes, it's lazy. You can incorporate the same message and theme and still have it resolved in a satisfying way. And then everything is just fixed. The civil unrest in Tewa is over and Kud can come back home. Yay for having no consequences and for easily solving large conflicts. Anyway, Kud comes home and everyone is happy and then her route ends. Even with everything I ended up complaining about with this route, I honestly kind of prefer it here over the visual novel. Like I said, Kud's route is admittedly the weakest in the game, so the anime can't really be blamed for this one. They just ended up adapting Kud's route so well that it ended up carrying a lot of the issues that the visual novel had. The anime is at least more touching in regard to the ending, as it's more about their friendship rather than Riki and Kud's relationship, which is another reason I prefer the route in the anime. Riki and Kud's relationship in the visual novel was kind of awkward and honestly makes me angry. Like, please, I don't want to know the intimate details of their relationship. Please stop giving me the specifics of exactly how they kissed. Riki is also very forceful with her at times, which he isn't like in any of the other routes. She'd be worried or panicking about something, and Riki's brilliant plan is to just force a kiss on her until she calms down, which she tries to push him away from on multiple accounts before just accepting it. Please, don't do this in real life. I much prefer their relationship in the anime. Because the route isn't that strong in the visual novel, it also isn't that strong in the anime. It just seems amazing when compared to the other routes. And because they gave Kud more attention than the other characters, she not only has the best route in the anime, but is also the best and most endearing character in the cast. The extra episode they gave her benefited her route greatly. Because that extra episode was adapted from her route instead of the common route, they could fit a lot more scenes and information, making her route go much more smoothly. It also helps that her route is relatively short and straightforward. Regardless, it goes to show that if we just had a few more episodes to work with, it could greatly raise the quality of other routes, like Haruka's. You know, just as a random example.
ずっとずっと楽しいことしてたのに、あいつがまいたんだ。あいつは今になって私に与えたものが欲しくなって、全部奪うことにしたんだ。学園の中でも、三枝の家と同じことされるのは嫌だ。嫌だ。痛いのは嫌。 辛いのは嫌。苦しいのもひもじいのも悲しいのも嫌。でも、もっと嫌なのは、私が言っちゃいけないって言われるのが一番嫌。
I think Haruka's route in the visual novel is strong, with a few glaring issues. Maybe it's just me, but the route in the visual novel is surprisingly very complex and hard to follow, which is weird when you consider what it's about. It should be one of the more straightforward ones, as it's about Haruka and her sister's bitter relationship as well as their upbringing, but for some reason they made Futaki's motivations so vague and unclear that it's hard to determine why she did the things she did and what her exact feelings were on the route's conflicts. The anime, on the other hand, gives us a much more straightforward explanation towards their rivalry, which is probably for the best. The whole cult family business thing is kind of weird and unrelatable as well, though I guess it does work better with the way both Haruka and Futaki act towards each other. Besides those things, however, it's a route that I really like in the visual novel. It explores what abuse can do to people mentally and emotionally, as displayed by Haruka. In the route, we see sides of her that she tries to hide. Her angry, aggressive, sorrowful, and hateful side, which are all incredibly extreme. People might not like how drastic she behaves and talks to others in the visual novel, but it's trying to convey a realistic outcome of someone who was raised by abusive guardians. Haruka's route in the game is somewhat unique in the fact that it uses her and Riki's romantic relationship as an important part of the plot and is used to progress one thing to another. In most other routes, they do incorporate the romance between Riki and the other characters somewhat into the plot, but it really wouldn't be that difficult to remove the relationship aspect in a lot of these routes. You just need to rewrite a few scenes and moments. The anime does just that, since a lot of these stories stay essentially the same regardless if Riki is in a relationship with these characters or not. Kuragaya, Rin, and Haruka's route are the only ones where the romance was actually important to the plot and character development. In the case of Kuragaya, whose route was adapted in the Refrain anime, they actually did incorporate it since it was so important, which is weird because the anime usually tries to purge all aspects of a relationship for the sake of the main heroine. They made her route work by adding just a few lines, like Riki wondering if Kuragaya is really the one he likes or not. Going back to the visual novel, some of the problems Haruka goes through and a lot of the character development correlate with her relationship with Riki. There are a lot of scenes in the visual novel that build up that relationship before they finally do get together. Haruka having a crush on Riki is actually pretty important to her backstory and why she always hangs around him. As it's building up their relationship, and when they do finally get together, a lot of her problems start coming to light, like her unhealthy relationship with her sister and her trust issues. All these largely stem from a history of family abuse, and that's also pretty complicated. These problems are brought to light from Riki visiting her house, but her parents aren't the one that abused her, it was the relatives she grew up with, who weren't her parents. Yeah. So while you could cut the romance from a lot of these routes with little to no consequences when it comes to their individual stories, with Haruka's route, it's not that simple. It's possible, but not simple. You can tell the events of the story without the romance, but a surprising amount would have to be changed or it would feel silly. Changing something isn't inherently bad. The route could have worked in the anime with some serious tweaking and messing around with the script, but the way they ended up handling it resulted in a rushed, awkward, overly dramatic route that severely diminished the original's character and emotional impact. But hey, on a completely unrelated note, have you ever started watching a movie halfway through? Like coming home and seeing your family watching something that you decide to join in on right then and there? Chances are that the more dramatic scenes won't have that much of an impact on you, and in some cases can be funny out of context. But at least in this situation, you can imagine that there was enough before this point in the movie where these scenes are justified. So as a totally random example, let's take, I don't know, the bench scene from Haruka's route. This scene is around 35 to 40% through her route in the visual novel, and it's around the time where things start to hit their boiling point. In the scene, Haruka asks Riki to help her repair a bench that the player has actually heard about a few times already. As she's trying to repair it, Futaki shows up and says that the bench was set to be destroyed and replaced with a new one, and that Haruka already knew this. Despite Haruka saying that the new bench won't be necessary if she just fixes this one, Futaki ignores her and has the disciplinary committee destroy the bench right then and there. Haruka gets very upset and emotional, even throwing a mini tantrum, because a bench she likes ends up being scrapped by Futaki. As the player, we know why this scene is meaningful, but imagine this scene out of context. She's getting so upset over something as silly as a bench. Why is she overreacting this much? It's just a freaking bench, get over it. A scene like this would not only seem silly, but have no impact watching it out of context. Well hey, I have good news for you. You don't have to imagine it because they freaking did it. Haruka's route in the anime starts at the bench scene from her route in the visual novel. Like, Where do I even start? Haruka in the anime is a vastly toned down version of herself from the visual novel, but I feel like I can't even compare the two because at this point in the visual novel, we already know so much about her and where things are going. Anime Haruka had one episode before this point where it establishes that she's a prankster that gets into trouble with the disciplinary committee. She has a very brief interaction with Futaki in that episode that didn't really amount to much, but I feel like I can't bring Futaki up here either because we don't know her besides being Ku's roommate and being part of the disciplinary committee. We're at the very beginning of Haruka's route, and this is quite literally the second interaction between the two. Why cut out roughly half of the route's content, you may ask? This is only speculation, but as it turns out, most scenes before this point were scenes that built up romantic tension between Riki and Haruka and furthered their relationship. I suppose they couldn't find any way to rework these scenes at all? I don't blame them, it's a lot of one-on-one time, with Riki going over to Haruka's house on occasion and even accidentally meeting her parents. But because the anime doesn't want to include any scenes that include just the two of them, a lot of other moments from later on are excluded as well. So not only do we not get the first hour and a half of her route, but we're missing a shocking amount of scenes scattered throughout. A lot of important moments where we learn more about Haruka are just not there anymore. So we not only lack context for these beginning scenes, but not a whole lot is learned about Haruka in general, making any future scenes that could have left an impact on the audience fall flat. At this point in the visual novel, we've had more than enough scenes illustrating that Haruka and Futaki at least don't like each other, both in the common route and Haruka's route. You can tell there's something more between the two than just bitter feelings. As for Haruka herself, a large part of why we start to get to know her on a deeper level is because she trusts Riki and feels safe being vulnerable around him. So when we get to the bench scene in the visual novel, we already know her pretty well, even if things haven't hit their boiling point yet. We know how much of a bully Futaki can be, and at one point we even switch perspectives from Riki to Haruka. We've had plenty of time to get to know her. The bench scene does not feel out of place in the visual novel. In the anime, what's even been revealed about her? We barely know her at this point. Things like her saying that Riki was the first person to ever be nice to her, to Futaki insulting and belittling her. None of it has any impact at all. We do get the impression that there's something more behind their relationship in both this scene and the next scene where they both say that they hate each other. But in the visual novel, we already know that and more. They say that they both hate each other when they spent maybe 10 minutes of screen time together, which can work narratively, but we've had nothing in the anime to see why she has so many negative feelings, both generally and towards Futaki, making these scenes lack any impact. There is no deeper meaning behind any of it yet because it's out of context. If we knew their relationship better and the meaning behind Futaki's actions instead of this being their second interaction, this would have been more than just a melodramatic scene where Haruka loses her precious bench. I don't want to make it seem like this route is bad because it's not exactly like the visual novel, but the scene is just silly now. We just learned about Haruka being attached to the bench and now she's crying over it. Haruka, the damsel in distress, is being bullied by the evil Futaki. Her heart of gold tells the rest of the cast to not cause any more trouble, but we can still see that she is heartbroken. She does get a little frustrated at Futaki when she first shows up, but for the most part, she's just poor defenseless Haruka. I mean, anyone would get upset if something they liked was destroyed or taken away from them. But if you compare just a few of these dramatic scenes from both the anime and the visual novel, there's a stark contrast. Haruka not only gets dejected and sad, she's also a very, very angry person and downright hateful towards Futaki, and this is very consistent throughout the route. The anime inadvertently changes her character by not including the first 40% of her routes, as well as every other scene they skip. She seems more like a damsel in distress now with a hint of bitterness. I say hint because there are only 2 or 3 instances of her demonstrating it. The scene after this, she throws some desks around, and in the next episode, she says how she's purposely made Futaki's life hard over the years. Besides those 2 scenes, Haruka just cries and complains. The only other time she shows aggression is when she weakly punches Futaki later in the route, holding herself back because she's a non-violent person deep down in her maiden heart, I guess. If they can keep the character consistent like this, then I suppose there isn't that much to criticize, but one of the reasons I like her out in the visual novel so much is because the way she behaves lines up pretty well with how she was raised. Haruka in the visual novel has a goofy demeanor that essentially hides her true character, the side that was developed because of physical, emotional, and mental abuse. Actual abuse from her family. She grew up thinking that people don't need her, that she's not good enough, that she's useless, a result of being blamed for everything bad that happened around her growing up. She says in the visual novel that if she acts acts like herself, people won't need her, so she started acting like a buffoon. She thinks that if she acts like her normal self, that people will hate her, like the people who raised her. Her negative aspects aren't the entirety of her character, but they are still relevant aspects of her and for the plot. She lashes out in the visual novel, not only wanting to hurt Futaki, but she throws bowls and dishes at her home, desks at school, hits people when they try and restrain her, including Riki. She throws actual tantrums. This might seem drastic or extreme to some people, but this is how she was raised. It's all she knows. She has this distorted view of reality where she thinks that in order for her to be happy, someone else needs to suffer, which Futaki also believes since she was raised by the same people. Anime Haruka, theoretically, should be like this too. If Riki really was the first person to ever be nice to her like she says, she shouldn't really know anything else except for the things that she was raised with. I can't help but be disappointed that she's just a watered down version of what she is in the visual novel. So, the disciplinary committee holds a school trial to decide a fitting punishment for her countless infractions. Can the disciplinary committee do this kind of thing without the permission of an adult? I know they are the disciplinary committee, but you don't organize a club like this without adult supervision. Teenagers are freaking stupid. Giving people power like this at a young age without any guidance at all can lead to teenagers doing really stupid and corrupt things. In the visual novel, this was just a committee meeting that Haruka decided to eavesdrop on with Riki following her. When she's brought up in the meeting, she bolts up and says objection, which is probably why they made it into a court trial in the anime. The premise for the scene itself is silly, but it's actually handled well. The committee continually accusing her of doing things triggers a memory she has of adults abusing her, which is a good way of showing us what she's been through without actually telling us, even if it isn't subtle with it at all. The way it portrays Haruka's rapid spiral into madness is also done well. This is one of the only scenes where Haruka acts out and throws any kind of tantrum, telling everyone to shut up and throwing desks around. Kuragaya steps in and stops her before things get too out of hand, which I think is touching. It's a good scene since we're learning more about Haruka and can be sympathetic for her. However, there is still little meaning behind the two sisters' relationship. Futaki is literally just acting like a bully, evil smile and all. At least by the end of the scene, we know that there's something going on between the two with the I hate you exchange. The next day at school, there are flyers everywhere and rumors about Haruka being the daughter of a criminal, and it's so freaking funny watching everyone drop things because of dramatic shock. And by everyone, I mean Riki and Haruka. Riki dropping his bag, Haruka dropping her bag, Riki dropping the flyers he just picked up, all in the span of a minute and 10 seconds. I will say though that everyone gathering the flyers is pretty heartwarming, but mainly just Kengo telling people to leave. I like Kengo, he's cool. They find out where Haruka is, and literally everyone decides to go. It's the same thing as what happens in Kudrout. The scene was very personal in the visual novel, but we can't have any meaningful moments between Riki and Haruka, so let's just jam everyone into one scene. I feel awkward just looking at this. Having everyone there is kind of inconsiderate of them. If I were in Haruka's shoes, I'd want to be alone with as few people as possible. I wouldn't want to face anyone right then. Like, if I was ugly crying, I would appreciate it if as few people as possible saw me in such a vulnerable position. Maybe one person to comfort me, but everyone? I wouldn't be able to look any of them in the face for a while if that happened. But then she just starts telling them her whole life story right then and there. This information getting out is really traumatizing for me, but let me tell you the full story anyway, lol. I could maybe see the story being a good start to the next episode, only for it to show her telling the story to Riki, or to everyone if they absolutely must, after some time has passed. Not literally the day of. Has even an hour passed since all of this has happened? Riki is doing all the talking while everyone is just standing there. I would feel so awkward if I were back there. It's such personal information and they aren't doing anything. Granted, they are saying some things, but it's mostly just echoing what Riki is saying. Basically, Haruka and Futaki are part of an old noble family where a woman has to marry two men. They're twins, but they have two different fathers. I'll spare you the details. Since one of the fathers is a criminal and damaged the Saigusa name, they felt the need to pin the blame on one of the daughters and have the other one become the new head of the family. They compared the two viciously to determine which one was the daughter of a criminal, and over time it was decided that Haruka was that daughter. She became the scapegoat for all their problems and would abuse her when something went wrong. Haruka decided that she would start causing trouble to upset Futaki Futaki and get her in trouble with the family for not keeping her under control. They even sent a spy to watch both of them while they're at school. The main differences with the story between the anime and the visual novel is that Futaki found their parents and had Haruka go over to live with them. And in the anime, it's said that no one knows where the parents are. I will give credit where credit is due. Haruka describing what she's done to Futaki over the years is portrayed well and gives off a pretty chilling vibe. I really wish there are more moments like this in her route. It shows actual raw pent-up emotion from the things she's been through over the years. I think I would have liked it a lot more if she were portrayed this way more often. She says that her family said it would be better if she were never born, and that she wishes that now too because the flyers have been spread out, which Riki immediately reprimands her for saying.
ダメだ。
どうして？
そんなの悲しいじゃないか。
Great line. A+, 100%. I'm sure she never thought of that. Riki scolds her in the visual novel, saying how it's a horrible thing to say. Regardless, the anime takes a much lighter approach to her comment as Riki and the others just start to comfort her, while Riki in the visual novel shakes Haruka back and forth, making her promise to never say it again. She's acting much more in line with her character in the visual novel, repeatedly asking why to Riki, almost like a child. It reflects her character a lot and is consistent with what she's been through so far. This is actually the scene where Riki tells Haruka that he likes her, so like, yeah, they had to change it. In the visual novel, she keeps asking why until he finally realizes it himself and tells her. So, of course, the anime changes this by having Riki tell her a story about how he was sad as a kid and how okay.
When I was young, my parents died, and I thought the same thing as you.
I think I hate Riki. And then the childhood friends all look so freaking proud when Riki mentions them like, yeah, we did that. We fixed Riki. That was us. Kengo, who was not there until literally just now, says that she's the mood maker of the group, and Haruka cries some more, and okay, we're done with this thing, I'm freaking tired of it. Later, Haruka bakes some muffins and shares them with Riki and Rin, and as it turns out, she's really bad at it. But they don't want her to know that, so they lie and say it's great. She's happy to hear that, and says that she's really good with eggs, despite being bad at cooking. I swear this is important information. I will say that the imagery used in the scene to convey how dry the muffins are is pretty funny. She also tells them that she's decided to see her supposed father since he was recently released from prison. They all visit him, but to no avail, as he won't tell her whose child she is.
三枝賞の娘は本当に三枝さんなのか?
Yes, Riki, that's the question we've been asking for the whole episode. He talks to Futaki for a bit, and we learn that the Saigusas distributed the flyers and that Futaki might know who Haruka's real father is. She also gives Riki a speech about how she believes that there's a fixed amount of happiness in the world. I could go over these scenes in more detail, but it's honestly just more of the same things we've been talking about. The next day, Riki is just chillin', I guess, and Haruka shows up and says to take a break and eat some more of her muffins. Riki says the muffins are much better than last time, which makes her drop the other muffins because of shock, I guess.
この間より美味しいね。生地がしっとりしてる。練習とかすごくしたのかな?
Haruka randomly asks Riki if he likes her before Haruka shows up and crashes the party. As it turns out, Futaki is pretending to be Haruka while giving Riki some muffins for some unfathomable reason. I mean, really, I can't think of a reason why. Now, I could tell you pretty easily for the scene in the visual novel, but in the context of the anime, I can't find a good reason at all. In the visual novel, Futaki is trying to take everything away from Haruka to drive her away. From small things like proving to be better with eggs than her, to something as big as fooling Riki into thinking that she's Haruka, proving that not even her boyfriend can tell the difference between the two. Riki loves Haruka, yet can't even tell when Futaki is pretending to be her, which leads to the bad endings. If Futaki has this same reason, what's with the dramatic dropping of the tray? Isn't the reason why she made the muffins because she knew that Haruka made them before and wanted to prove that she could make them better? If that isn't the reason anymore in the anime, what was she planning on doing with the muffins to begin with? What was their purpose? Was her plan from the beginning just to ask Riki if he likes her? Why the muffins then? I can understand being shocked by seeing someone pretending to be you, but why is Haruka this upset in this scene? They're not together, and as far as we know, she doesn't have a crush on him like in the visual novel. As said before, Haruka was hurt in the scene in the visual novel because Riki had a hard time telling the difference between the two. So what was the purpose in the anime since they're not together? Not to prove that she can make better muffins since she didn't know that Haruka made them before. If her reasoning is to point out that Riki can't tell the difference between her and Haruka, I don't think it would have left that much of an impact since they're not not dating, he's just a friend. I mean, I suppose from her story from the beginning of the route, it could be interpreted that she does have a crush on Riki. Alright, if that's the case, did Futaki ask Riki if he likes her disguised as Haruka to get him to reject her indirectly? Does that mean Futaki planned for Haruka to show up when she did? Why the muffins then? Why dress up as Haruka when you could have left a love letter or something in his locker? But... So Futaki's reason was to take everything away from Haruka? She does know about the muffins despite her indicating that she definitely didn't. Why did you drop the tray of muffins, man? I just want to know why. There are so many other better ways to prove whatever she was trying to prove that isn't this convoluted. Legit, I can't answer any of these questions. I can't help but feel they included the scene because it felt iconic. Like, if you can't find a good way to incorporate it, just don't incorporate it at all. You've already made so many other changes from the visual novel. What's one more? I know it's ripped from the visual novel, but in this context, it doesn't make sense to me. Anyway, a few more things happen that still don't explain anything, and Futaki leaves as it continues to pour down rain.
僕には降りしきる雨が二木さんの涙のように見えた。
How? What a dramatic freaking line, like wow, so deep. Not said in the visual novel, by the way. They're trying really hard to make Futaki out to seem like she hates doing this. And I guess I can't blame them since they have so much in the visual novel to work with and such little time to fit all that information. Sorry for jumping ahead again, but at the end of the route we find out that Futaki was just pretending to hate Haruka all along so that Haruka doesn't die. That's a lot more clear cut than what we get in the visual novel. In the game, Futaki gives us more than enough information that she's just as messed up as Haruka. She might feel guilty about doing these things to Haruka, but she's also doing it for her happiness because they were raised to believe that only one of them could be happy, according to Futaki herself, where she says that if someone is happy, then someone else has to be sad. I guess she doesn't believe that in the anime anymore, or else she wouldn't have been completely selfless like she's portrayed in the ending. But that brings up another interesting point because that exact scene is in the anime from the previous episode, implying that she does actually believe this. But whatever, in the anime she's an angel, regardless of what she believes. Coot even has to say to Riki that Futaki is a nice person in their room and that she's only pretending to be cold when she's outside. I don't know, man. The visual novel had a lot more to work with because they fit so much information in a single scene. How is the anime supposed to work with that? Because of the way the visual novel is structured, it has plenty of time to build up everything and make sure nothing is out of place. The anime goes at such a fast pace that it's hard to keep track of what's going on. Riki confronts Futaki and asks her why she pretended to be Haruka. She tells him a story of when they were younger, where she lies about not being able to touch eggs in an attempt to not have Haruka beaten. Riki tells Haruka that story and she gets upset and asks who she's supposed to hate if it's not her fault before she runs off. Kyosuke tells Riki that Haruka needs to figure out what she really wants and tells him to tell her that directly. So Riki asks Haruka what she really wants and she says that she wants to know whose kid she is.
それを知ったら問題は解決するのかな?
As if Haruka didn't think about that already, as if this wasn't the whole point of seeing whose daughter she was to begin with. Riki says that if Futaki really is Sho's daughter, that she would be torn apart, and Haruka's face looks shocked as if she just had this realization.
どうしたらいいの？
憎しみにとらわれていたら本当の答えは見えなくなる。三枝さんが心の一番深い場所で何を望んでいるのか見つけるんだよ。憎しみよりももっと大切なものを。
憎しみより大切な。
何か吹っ切ったと見えるな。
私、気持ち決めたよ。
Oh good, all it took for Haruka to get over her hate is for Riki to give her a speech about how hate isn't the answer and that it's not what she really wants. The same scene where Haruka was okay with forcing Futaki into her situation. Years of fighting and bickering, even saying in the same episode that she wants Futaki to die, all it took was one speech from Riki the psychological master. He really deserves a degree at this point. I suppose Haruka has the excuse that she never had any friends until the Little Busters, so no one told her any of this stuff and she never learned her lesson. But like, if I was a teenager and this was my situation, I wouldn't have listened. He doesn't understand me and what I've been through. Was Riki abused all his life? Does Riki have someone that hates his guts and makes his life unbearable? Did Riki have no friends growing up? Was Riki's dad a criminal? Was Riki bullied at school? No, Riki has it easy. He doesn't understand me at all. In the visual novel, she was at her breaking point, having multiple emotional breakdowns up until then. And Riki's line of questioning is more about Haruka's answers than it is about Riki just telling her how to feel. She realizes realizes this herself. She was guided by Riki the entire route, someone that not only she loves, but someone who loves her back. He has a lot of influence on her because of this. The next day, Haruka is more determined to ask Futaki for help, but it wasn't like she was cured instantly or had fully recovered at that point. I will admit that in the visual novel, they make up probably more quickly than they should have in the end, even if it was an emotional moment and most questions had been answered. Years of hatred don't just go away, but at least the payoff was worth the build-up, which I can't say about the anime. So, with Riki's help, Haruka decides to ask Futaki to come with her to ask Sho which one of them is his biological daughter. Except this time, it's for closure instead of wanting to switch places with her. I'm not gonna hate or fear you anymore, because I can just decide that. The abuse didn't cause any mental trauma at all, and I can just decide not to hate you, yuck. Futaki tries to discourage Haruka from asking any further, but it doesn't work as she's very determined now. Her life of abuse? Is that the one you're talking about? So Futaki tells the story on why she was so hard on Haruka, and it turns into a freaking soap opera. Futaki had to be hard on Haruka because if she didn't, the cult family would kill Haruka. They wanted Futaki to hate her since she's the daughter of a criminal, so she had to put on a show to satisfy them. They also threatened her life at one point too. Haruka understands the situation and forgives her for the things she's done, and suddenly remembers that Futaki told her when they were kids that she had to pretend to hate her for a while. Haruka says that she had always subconsciously held that in her heart, but forgot about it until just now. How convenient. With how dramatic the scene is, I would have loved to have more build-up for it. It just comes back to the anime needing more episodes for this kind of thing. Also, I can understand why Futaki would be so mean if they threatened to kill Haruka, but does that mean that Haruka is like in danger right now that Futaki has told her all this? They still have that spy tailing them, right? Well, I guess they aren't concerned about it because they decide to end the mystery by going to find out which one of them is the daughter of Sho. Excuse me? You can just decide to leave? Just like that? Will they even let you? The people that threatened to kill one of you will just let you go? The potential successor to their family? If it was that easy and you still loved Haruka this whole time, only pretending to hate her, why didn't you do this sooner? Was being the successor to the family really that important to you? I literally thought she didn't have a choice. I don't get it. Why didn't you leave? Why did you do all of this if you could just leave? What even is this route? I don't understand what's happening anymore. I say that Haruka's route in the visual novel is confusing, but it at least had a good line from Haruka at the end that clears some things up. With that line, you can understand that Futaki's actions and motivations were much different than they were in the anime. There's a lot of complexity, dare I say convolution, to Futaki's character, but she at least reflected what she believes as implied in her fixed amount of happiness speech. There are still questions that need answering, like what exactly Futaki is going to do with her relationship with the cult family, but it's still tied up nicely, even if it confused me for like 4 years before replaying her route a few times for this video. Back to the anime, the route ends with this incredibly awkward shot of everyone holding hands. They meet the other parents after not seeing them for their whole life, or at least for Haruka, and they all take a family picture. So, yeah. Despite the convolution the route had in the visual novel, it's still strong overall. Haruka and Riki's scenes together in the first half are cute, and Haruka's darker side being revealed as the route goes on makes for a very intriguing and engaging route. The relationship between the sisters is meaningful, even if there are seemingly some holes in the actual motivations. The sisters make up a bit too quickly, but the ending scene is emotional. These are things I unfortunately can't say about the anime. The first 2 hours of the route are just not there, excluding character building scenes and resulting in the majority of the route feeling rushed with little impact as we don't see these characters together for long enough for us to care. Haruka is a watered down version of herself from the visual novel, making the relationships and the scenes lack impact. It's probably the weakest route when it comes to the anime. You'd think with me saying that I should have saved it for last. But although I think Haruka's route is the weakest, it's not my least favorite. I'm upset with how the anime handled Haruka's route because I liked it in the visual novel, but I'm livid did with how they handled my favorite character route in the game, even if it doesn't have as many problems as Haruka's. A route belonging to a character I barely even recognize in the anime. If there's one thing that I'll give Haruka's route, it's that you can still see semblances of her character from the visual novel, even if it's only a small amount. Even if she is watered down, you can still tell that it's her. At the very least, they didn't completely change her character altogether.
きっとね、みんなと一緒にいて楽しいのは、みんなといるのをお互いに幸せに思うから。そんな幸せがいっぱいあるから楽しいのです。すごく好きな人たちがいてね。その人たちの笑ってるのが一番好きだったら。
Komari is my favorite character in the visual novel, and coincidentally, her route is also my favorite in the game, besides Refrain. I admit that I have a soft spot for the overly happy and positive characters. She's someone that finds joy in the joy of others and making others happy. We see so much of this side of her in the common route already, and then it gives us even more of that in her individual route. In fact, her character route is probably so short because we see so much of her already in the common route. She isn't a complex character, but that's not a bad thing. In fact, I think it's the opposite. Unlike Haruka, who was hiding part of herself, Komari is quite literally without guile.
これまだ途中なのに。
いや、別に恥ずかしいことじゃ。
恥ずかしくはないよ。
Her backstory is a little more complex, but not nearly as much as the other characters. She is simply someone who is optimistic and brightens up those around her, someone who we rarely see without a smile, someone who's sympathetic, someone who makes friends easily simply because she treats them with kindness, someone you can't begin to imagine being cruel to anyone for any reason. Perhaps she could be seen as a Mary Sue from my description of her, but they do it well enough in the visual novel to make her not come across as someone that's perfect. I like her character a lot. She's the kind of person I wish I were. I kind of wish they wouldn't make her so overly cute, with her making annoying noises for the sake of being moe or whatever, but it's something I can overlook. The themes and morals the game presents in her route are great and speak to me on a personal level. Despite her route being so short compared to the others, I think the messages are just as strong. Once again, they are simple and easy to understand, but that isn't a bad thing, especially with the way it's handled in her route. Simplicity can be beautiful.
あなたの目がもう少しほんのちょっとだけ見えるようになりますように。
The biggest and most obvious theme in her route, however, is one of mental health. Having a genuine and upbeat character like Komari being contrasted with what happens in her route was heartbreaking, but the positive message it conveyed because of it was powerful. Her ending scene in the route is one of my personal favorite moments in the game, and probably in my top 10 favorite scenes in media in general. She was given 3 episodes to work with. 3.5 if we're being very generous. The other characters had at least one more episode outside their routes to build and establish their character. Komari maybe has barely half an episode before her route starts. Maybe they thought it wasn't necessary since she's a simple character to begin with, but that doesn't mean that there isn't anything to her character. Or perhaps they did it this way because her route is the shortest in the visual novel? Who knows? A lot of her character is actually learned about in the common route, and they included maybe 2 of those scenes in episode 1 to 3. In the anime, we know a surface level of her optimism and willingness to help others, but that's only because it's told to us straight up instead of it being shown to us. Not that it doesn't show her kindness through her actions sometimes, but I can only think of a few moments of that actually happening. Even the scene where she's doing charity work in the visual novel, a scene that blatantly shows us what kind of person she is, now has every character included because of course it does. This scene doesn't show her kindness anymore, but rather everyone else's. Can't show her having any more traits than we've already shown because this scene is part of Mio's route now. Her friendly and cheerful personality is translated into her being a fluffball who's overly touchy-feely. Her cutesy moe side was turned up to 11 to the point where I can barely stand listening to her, and they transferred her clumsy and unlucky side by making her into an idiot. The anime seemed to have a difficult time with her character, almost like they didn't know how to present her personality. They have entire scenes over-exaggerating 1 or 2 of her traits in the beginning episodes, leaving impressions of her that aren't consistent throughout the show. They'll overblow one of these characteristics and then not have her act like that again. But that also might be because she becomes completely irrelevant after episode 6. When I look at Komari in the anime, she's not the same person as who I see in the visual novel. Her once genuine and honest personality seems to be completely overshadowed now by her being a bland, overly cutesy anime girl. Though, if I'll give the route in the anime anything, it's that it kept a part of her character that was subtle foreshadowing in the visual novel. In episode 2, Komari is trying to crawl out from below the water tank, but her skirt gets caught in something and part of her underwear shows. After that ordeal, she asks Riki to pretend that he didn't see anything, and she'll pretend that she wasn't in that situation to begin with. The scene actually combines the first 2 times you meet Komari in the visual novel. In the game, with her second encounter with her, she says she likes sweet food and often has this type of junk food as her lunch. This leads her to explaining her spiral of happiness theory, which is basically the same between the 2 versions, except the anime has her explain it in a more theatrical way. Basically, if you make someone happy, you'll feel happy in return, and your happiness will make the other person even happier, and it just keeps going on forever. It's not super complicated, but it's not supposed to be. While it's true that in both versions she does outright tell us, the visual novel has small and subtle moments demonstrating her theory that are sparse in the anime. Riki at first narrates that he doesn't really believe her theory, only to start to question if there's actually merit to it or not after he gives Komari a spoon after she forgot her fork. It's a small thing, but it's showing us that Riki giving Komari his spoon made him happy after she was fretting about not being able to eat. And even though that itself is easy to understand, it's still appreciated that it didn't outright tell us. And aside from these instances, the route has this whole underlying theme that demonstrates it better, that I'll get into later. Unfortunately, I can't say this about the anime, at least not on the same level. There are some things that carry over from the visual novel that show off her theory, but because they rush through the route, it's either easy to miss or missing altogether. It's an unfortunate side effect of the limited amount of time they had. The scene ends with Riki asking her to join the baseball team. The last half of the episode spends far too long on them cleaning out the storage shack. Good, just what I wanted, more filler. Since it's not officially Komari's route, I suppose it could have been anything, but this is the closest to a character-specific episode from the common route that we have for Komari. Include more scenes from the rooftop or something. Before actually cleaning out the shack, Komari shows up and says she has decided to join the baseball team, and then holds up oven mittens instead of actual baseball gloves. This is what I mean when I said that they made her into an idiot. This doesn't happen in the visual novel, surprise surprise. The next scene plays and it just shows her out in the distance stretching by herself while everyone watches. The scene does have its funny moments, but it's hard not to be frustrated. Why is she standing in the wrong direction to bat? Are you kidding me? Her missing the ball shows us that she's not very athletic, but then she gets distracted by a dandelion. This is not Komari. I refuse to believe it. She was a bit of an airhead in the visual novel, but she wasn't absolutely incompetent. She's clumsy and isn't athletic at all, but she at least had common sense. The only thing that suggests her lack of knowledge about baseball is when she puts on a baseball glove before running the field. And even then, when Kyosuke shows her how to pitch, she masters it right away, and he suggests that perhaps she was just merely uninformed. And some of her interactions are very awkward too. Maybe it's because I'm not a social person, but like, why does Komari randomly tickle Rin? They just met, right? She knew Rin from her class, but they apparently never spoke to each other until just today. Maybe she's just as socially awkward as I am? Just imagining someone doing this in real life in front of so many people makes me uncomfortable. I feel like they're over-exaggerating these traits just to show off how cute she is. Her route officially begins in episode 4, although I wouldn't blame you if you didn't know that at first since they spend over 4 minutes focusing on other things. I suppose it does end up leading to Komari as she gave a band-aid to one of the cats and Haruka, but did we need 4 minutes to do that? Anyway, Riki finds Komari on the roof again sleeping, where she sleep talks and says brother. After she wakes up, they start eating sweets again. Riki asks her if she has a brother and she says that she's an only child but has reoccurring dreams about having a brother reading her a story about a chicken and an egg. The next day, Riki and Rin go onto the rooftop and Komari says she was looking for the book they talked about yesterday, even though she said it was only a story from her dreams. So I guess all it took for Komari to start looking for the book she's seen in her dreams for literal years is Riki asking if she has a brother from the previous day. It's almost like she was waiting for Riki to ask her something. The book was signed by someone named Takuya, who has the same last name as her, and she's convinced it's her brother even though she said she didn't have a brother the day before. The most embarrassing scene in the anime plays as Rin starts speaking in cat at Komari because she's too shy to actually speak to her. Okay, people can be awkward like this in real life. and it's just as uncomfortable in real life as when someone does it on TV. She's so excited to hear that she immediately invites Rin to go to the retirement home with her and doesn't give Rin the chance to say no. But because this is the anime, of course literally everyone went. Well, everyone we know up until this point at least. Can't have Riki and Komari be alone together after all. So because everyone is there, everyone has to be shown helping out and doing various other shenanigans, like saying alright, playing some games, and being in some kind of talent show. I sure wish we used this time for literally anything else. I sound like a broken record, but Komari's route already has such little time to fully tell its story already. Can we please focus on that? Masato does his embarrassing muscle dance in the talent show, and Kengo swings his sword almost as if to convey that this scene is freaking useless. The only important scene worth mentioning is that Riki encounters a grumpy old man that we later find out is Komari's grandfather. Komari tries to talk to the old man too, but is yelled at like Riki was, and she runs away. You'd think with how often Komari visits this place that the old dude would know who she is by now, especially if she really is his granddaughter. Why did you do that to Komari? That girl's name is Komari? She's definitely 100% my granddaughter based on her name alone. My, how she has grown. Honestly, I'm just nitpicking at this point. The dude didn't realize that Komari was his granddaughter in the game until Riki says a few things about her and he puts 2 and 2 together. I just think his reaction in the anime is funny. The next episode starts, and I could complain about how they could have used the first 3 minutes on literally anything else, but I'm just really tired at this point. Komari tells Riki and Rin about another dream she had about her brother. Riki jumps to a conclusion about Komari's brother being dead because Komari said her dream had white things flapping around, which he immediately somehow knows are drapes on the roof of a hospital, something he had a lot more time to think about in the visual novel. He goes to see Komari's grandfather, where he confirms that Takuya was in a hospital and that he's dead. Komari and Riki go stargazing, and she asks Riki on a date to go to a place that holds her lost memories. They go to her hometown and then to a lake where she asks Riki to fill in as her brother. Afterwards it starts to rain, Riki finds a dead cat, Komari goes insane and has a flashback of her brother and remembers everything. Ignoring the fact that I just summarized the second episode of the route in 30 seconds, my summary of those events might have sounded really abrupt, but it's to convey just how suddenly this all happens in both the anime and the visual novel. Komari's reaction to the dead cat is very abrupt, and honestly, I think it's very fitting. It's just a shame that neither version goes into depth on why. And because it doesn't give us a reason for her sudden breakdown, it can definitely come off as awkward, and I don't blame people if they have problems with this scene. In the visual novel, Riki himself says it comes out of nowhere and that it was instantaneous, saying that he can't fathom what's going on. Though, this could be seen as the writer trying to justify the scene itself without needing the build-up. I think both versions would have benefited from a prior knowledge of what triggers are and how they can happen instantaneously, like even a few scenes where it's just briefly mentioned. You could even have the grandfather suffer from PTSD and have a mini episode. I'll leave it at that for now. However, the fact that this is the end of the episode means we only have one more episode to resolve all this. I sure hope that goes well. Riki brings Komari back to his dorm with the dead cat, and Masato says he'll bury it while Komari takes a shower so she doesn't catch a cold. After that, she tells Riki what happened back when her brother was in the hospital. They would play together a lot, and he would read stories to her on the hospital rooftop. The night before he died, he told Komari that this was all just a dream, and that when he's gone, there won't be anything to be sad about. He basically inadvertently caused Komari's current problem.
全部夢なんだ。そう、夢なんだよ。全部夢なんだ。
みんな夢だから悲しくない。
Holy crap, telling us once is enough! Komari's actions when she wakes up is enough for us to understand what's going on. But of course, the show has to repeat it over and over again, and then Riki just explains it to us anyway, just in case we didn't catch it the first 3 times. So Rin and Kuragaya show up and say that Masato told them that something had happened to Komari. Upon seeing her, Kuragaya said it'd be better if they didn't know exactly what happened, and they tell Komari it's time to go back to the girls' dorm. But she says she wants to stay with Riki, calling him her brother. He convinces her to go anyway, and the other girls escort her outside, with her dressed in only a white button-up shirt. I mean, maybe you guys should have her changed before you guys leave. You did say you brought her a change of clothes after all. Probably shouldn't expose her like this in public. Please stop. The next scene has the characters having a round table discussion about Komari and her problems, because of course they are. So even though Kuragaya says they shouldn't ask about what happened, they decide to have a business-like meeting about it anyway. I guess they feel like they have to have this exclusive meeting to see what they can do about the situation. And by that, I mean pushing everything onto Riki so he can solve it himself. Komari called Riki her brother once, and suddenly he's the only person that can help because he's so special to her now. From what we know of Kyosuke and the others, this seems pretty out of character for them, even for this only being episode 6 of the anime. They all know her at least somewhat at this point, and she's even part of the Little Busters now. But nope, it's all up to Riki. I'm going to go into light spoilers for Refrain now, so if you don't want to hear it, skip to this part of the video. Okay, where was I? And I know you can just bring up Refrain to justify this. They're just trying to make Riki stronger. The fact that you can just bring up Refrain to justify the bad writing is in of itself a problem. You shouldn't need to bring up something that happens 30 episodes from now to explain awkward and out of place situations. Does hindsight make previous problems justifiable in the long run? Actually, I would have loved it if this scene hinted to Refrain. It would have been a lot more interesting to see that Kyosuke is obviously behind something that the audience isn't aware of yet. It would create a lot of mystery towards Kyosuke's character early on in the show. But because it doesn't, it comes off as being out of character for him. But I guess it doesn't matter because Riki just accepts it anyway.
I'm the only one who can save Komari-san.
Riki, literally the most important person in the world to Komari, topping even her parents, current friendships, and any other relationship she's ever had, is the only one who can do anything. How does Riki do it, folks? But I'll give credit where credit is due. The anime left something out of Komari's route in the visual novel that was pretty silly. The grandfather went through the exact same thing with his wife, whose name was also Komari. His situation back then was quite literally the exact same thing as what Riki is going through with Komari right now, and it's kinda dumb. So the anime got rid of that, and instead had the old man just experience this kind of thing with Komari before. She would see some sort of death, like the old man's wife or her pet goldfish, and the current experience she's having now would result, and she would slowly go back to normal, having no recollection of what had happened. She's been through this multiple times before. The old man straight up says that he doesn't know what Riki should do and directs him to Takiya's grave. So Riki visits the grave and he's inspired to make a children's book because that's what he thinks Takiya would do. Riki adds on to the book Takiya made and finishes it in hopes that Komari can face the truth head on. He meets Komari on the rooftop of the school and straight up tells her that her brother is dead and to accept it.
夢じゃないんだ。だから悲しいことだっていっぱい起こるよ。
He gives her the book and tells her to read it. Riki tells her his absolutely brilliant Oscar-worthy story about how he was sad as a kid and that the Little Busters saved him, which I can only assume at this point is what he just always says to comfort someone with how many times he says it throughout the series. Hardest days of my life. Both my parents are dead. The Little Busters cured me of my sadness. LOL, just be happy like me. Feel better yet?
小まりさんも同じだよ。僕やリンと一緒にこれから走り始めるんだ。だから笑って。辛い時も悲しい時も僕たちがリトルバスターズが一緒だから笑って。日だまりみたいに。
Okay, Riki, good starting point. Nice little speech you got there. Not sure telling her to smile because of how many friends she has is the best thing you could have told her, but your heart's in the right place. I'm sure this is a great step forward for Komari. Times will still be hard, but with you and the Little Busters there to support her, we can make some good progress into improving her mental
真っ
health.
白なページに小まりさんが新しいお話を書いていくんだ。
私がいつまでも泣いてたらリキ君もりんちゃんもみんなも悲しいんだね。お兄ちゃんはもういないんだね。でも素敵なものいっぱい見つけられる。これから。
Well, holy crap, she's cured. She sure got over that fast. Who knew that all you had to do was tell her that sad things happen and how you can move on and she would be fine? Ignore the fact that it's literally the most cliche thing you can say to a kid who's struggling with the concept of death. Riki the genius manages to do what her parents and grandparents somehow didn't tell her already. Just accept reality and be happy, bro. It's not that hard. I'm glad she got better so freaking fast. I was afraid she was suffering from a mental disorder, PTSD or something. But nope, she got over it so quickly that there is no way she had a mental illness to begin with. In the anime, at least. It's okay, just get over it, lol, it's fine, just don't be sad. Just don't have mental problems. It's too bad her parents were too stupid to teach her this simple lesson or else she would have been fine much earlier in her life. Or maybe Riki's stupid story about how he was sad as a kid is just the cure-all for all sadness. I was so freaking sad as a kid, but I got over it, so you can get over it, so get over it. Riki, you stupid idiot, why didn't you say this sooner? Don't you know basic psychology? Didn't you know if you said this exact combination combination of words that it would just fix anyone immediately and Komari would be freaking fine! Just flip the switch in her brain, bro. It's set on sad right now and needs to be flipped to happy, you moron. Let's not dig deeper into her mental state or her background. Let's spend only 21 minutes on it and she'll be fine. Definitely wouldn't have benefited having more time to flesh this out. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I know I'm overreacting, but this is one of my favorite scenes in the visual novel. It was changed for some strange reason to what we see in the anime. As you play her route in the game, you start to notice that Riki mentions Komari's smile a lot and does so more frequently the further you get into the route. Over and over and over again, he makes comments about her smile. As soon as I left the office, her smile was there to welcome me. Just seeing her smile is such a good thing. A smile really did suit her best. I think her smile is even brighter than the sun. Her spiral of happiness theory starts to actually happen to the point where Riki feels like he relies on her smile and positive personality. She suddenly gets triggered into her broken mental state by seeing death and she stops being Komari. Stops smiling, no longer has a positive personality, and Riki in the visual novel says how hard it is for him to see her like this. He continues to mention her smile and happiness even though she isn't displaying them. Where was that happy smile, radiant as the sun? She hadn't smiled since I met her this morning. I really like it best when she smiles. Cheesy? Sappy? Sure, but I don't care. It goes to show just how important her personality is to him. In the final scene where he presents his book, it's not necessarily the book or telling her that sad things happen that hits a chord with her. It's his emotional breakdown when he practically begs for her to smile again.
悲しいことがあっても僕が隣で笑ってあげる。小鞠さんが悲しいよりももっといっぱい嬉しいことを探してあげる。だからさ。笑ってよ。前みたいにさ。僕は笑ってる小鞠さんが大好きだよ。
Man, this scene always hits me. Riki is saying similar things in both versions, but his mindset and actions are very different. He's being more selfish. He's in a completely different mental state than he was just a minute ago. He was trying to hold everything in to stay strong for Komari, but there was only so much he could take before he completely broke down. He's not just saying to smile for encouragement or in a place of comforting her. He is being completely irrational, not thinking clearly, begging for her to smile again, not knowing what else to do. He embraces her and starts crying. He narrates that he knew that he was supposed to be smiling for her, to support her, to be the strong one of the two, but words and tears just kept coming out. It's ironic because the things he's describing in his narration about how strong he's supposed to be is exactly how Riki acts in the anime. Actions speak louder than words, and everything Riki does in this scene is sending a direct message to Komari that he cares for her. It's much more convincing than just saying it. The wording is similar in both versions, but the message that's conveyed is much different. That's what struck a chord with her. That's what made her realize she needed to embrace the situation. And even then, I did not get the impression that she recovered immediately. She's still in trauma in this scene. It's sad right now, but she has people who are there for her. Her brother passing away is tragic and she's been blocking it out of her mind for years, but she can continue to make happy memories with the people she cares for. She doesn't recover immediately because it is sad right now. Tragic things happened in her life and it's affecting her mental state and has been for years. But there's hope for the future ahead. It's okay to be sad and still struggle with it mentally, but there is hope. However, those words wouldn't just cure someone. Riki's actions are impactful and were enough to make her realize that she needs to face her tragic past. That itself doesn't remove her trauma, but she can finally take steps forward to improving her mental health. She was not fully recovered by the end of the route, and she still had to deal with her issues and might need to for a very long time. Imagine her reaction to the old man dying, but she's a little better off now than she used to be and can deal with them better, especially with Riki by your side. Mental illness doesn't just go away, and anyone suffering from any form of it can tell you that in an instant. Oh, how absolutely wonderful that would be if that were the case. A lot of these diagnoses can last a lifetime, even with medication and therapy. It takes a lot of hard work to know how to deal with it and become stronger than it. This route demonstrates in a simple way that there is hope. There is no complex explanation or subtlety here. It's a simple, straightforward message that there is hope, that you can still make happy memories, to not give up, that you can make a difference in others' lives, realize that you matter much more than you think. Perhaps something as simple as your smile is enough to brighten someone else's day, whether you know them or not. You may struggle with it for a long time, but during that time, you can learn to manage it. You might have noticed that the visual novel has this underlying theme of mental illness throughout its entirety. It's never outright said, but it's very present, whether it was intentional or not. You'll notice in each character's route that they show a group of traits that can correlate with a few very specific diagnoses that are never directly said. Riki, in each route, helps these characters learn coping mechanisms to better handle their mental problems, but they were not fully recovered. These traits are barely present with these characters in the anime, and Komari's route is the most blatant example of this. I saved her route for last for those reasons. It's a perfect representation of how many of the themes and the depth of the visual novel were destroyed in the anime. Instead of sending a message of taking steps into improving your mental health, it's instead, at best, a simple story. The visual novel is full of subtlety and reading in between the lines. There's a lot of depth to be uncovered, and it respects the audience's intelligence by rarely outright telling you what to think unless it's crucial to understanding the basic plot. Even having played the visual novel many times, I feel like I'm still missing a lot of things. The anime adapts that basic plot and very little of its depth. Even Komari's route, probably the most straightforward to understand in the visual novel, did not convey that message of mental health, or at least not on the same level if we're being incredibly generous. Actually, Komari's route in general is just a culmination of everything we've been talking about in the video. Just like the common route, her route is full of filler and stretching out scenes unnecessarily. Like Mio's route, Komari's ending was very abrupt. Ironically, unlike Haruka's route, instead of Komari being a watered down version of herself, a few of her traits were blown out of proportion, leaving us with a character I barely recognize. But hey, at least Komari's route is unique in the fact that it changed the ending just enough that it lost all its emotional impact. Perhaps you felt the same things I did with the visual novel when watching the anime, and I sincerely hope that's the case. Unfortunately, I did not feel these things when watching it again for this video. I did enjoy the anime back in 2012, just not nearly on the same emotional level as I did when playing the visual novel years later. I'll give credit where credit is due. The fond memories I had of the anime were enough for me to buy the game, and if I hadn't watched it all those years ago, I wouldn't have played what came to be one of my favorite visual novels. But after playing it and going back to the anime, the way they handled adapting it was frustrating for me. I'm sure you can find many positive things about the anime. I don't think it's terrible, but it's certainly a far cry from the visual novel in terms of quality. Adapting a 60+ hour story into a limited time slot is difficult. As much as I would have liked to see the anime be twice as long, I understand that making an anime isn't a simple process. It costs a lot of money to make, and it also takes an incredibly long time. However, with the state that it's in, regardless of how many problems the team ran into or how hard or stressful it was to make, at the end of the day I feel like it fell short. A lot of reasons I love the visual novel are either not handled well or are gone. That being said, the adaptation of Refrain is very good. They had 13 episodes to work with for Refrain, and they did incredibly well with it. It goes to show that you can adapt something very long into a short time slot. I would have liked more episodes in season 1, sure, but even though there wasn't, it could have been the same quality as season 2. If you have not played Little Busters, you can get official releases of it on Steam and the Switch eShop. It's $35, but the Steam version goes on sale every now and then if you don't want to spend that kind of money. Even if you've seen the anime and know what happens, it's still worth it to see the extra content and experience the differences between the two versions. I highly recommend it.